Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Women in Football's latest webinar. We're really grateful to all our members for your support, and for just taking time out of your day to join us. We know you're all really busy and hectic, and we do appreciate everyone coming together this afternoon. The feedback we've been receiving from you regarding our webinars has been so positive and encouraging. And I know this is sort of, I say it's a serious subject. I know times have been difficult for all of us. So it's something we wanted to address this afternoon in our Future of the Workplace post-COVID-19. We did set up these webinars in response to the COVID-19 work crisis, and we hope that you continue to find these inspiring and informative as things do start getting back to normal for some of us. We're going to be carrying on with our series, so do let us know via email on events@womeninfootball.co.uk if you would like to see a webinar on any topic in particular or something that you feel we haven't covered so far. It'd be really great to hear from you, so do send in your feedback or thoughts. I want to thank Poonam Majithia, Alan Layton, Verity Turner and Lungi Masibo for joining us today. We're really delighted to have you here for what will be an informative and engaging conversation about the future of the workplace post-COVID-19. We just want to discuss a bit about how we navigate the workplace in this new world, how can we look after our mental well-being, the new ways of working that we're all finding we've got to face, and also the opportunities that this may bring. So I'm going to introduce you to our panel. Firstly, with our facilitator for this afternoon, Poonam. Poonam is the legal counsel at Chelsea Football Club and has been at the club since June 2019. Previously, Poonam worked at the British Olympic Association as a lawyer on secondment in the run-up to and during the Rio 2016 Games and the 2018 Winter Olympic Games. In August 2019, so a year ago, Poonam joined Women in Football as its first beneficiary of the Vicky Orvis Memorial Director Development Scheme. This scheme offers one individual the opportunity to help develop the skills necessary to seek a board position by working closely with the WIF board for 12 months. I think Poonam would say this herself, but I think for her, the scheme's been enjoyable and beneficial. And she said that she does urge women to not shy away when opportunities like this arise. Her year is actually coming to a close now, but she's going to continue to be actively involved with us going forward, which is great news for all of us. So welcome to Poonam. She'll be taking over from me shortly. We're also delighted to be joined by Alan Layton. Alan is a National Secretary for Prospect Trade Union. Prospect is a UK trade union with 140,000 members in the private and public sectors. They are the largest union in the UK representing professional engineers. Alan's had extensive experience in representing members working in sport, mainly including referees, umpires and ground staff. Alan has advised WIF members on various employment issues over the years and also has very generously hosted us for events when we could get all together and they weren't remote. So we'll look forward to a time when we can come together in your offices again, Alan. So welcome. I'm going to introduce Verity. Verity is a business development manager at Global Sports, which is the leading careers platform for the international sports industry. Their mission is to inspire individuals to build amazing careers in the sports business, providing data-driven advertising and branding solutions to sports companies, academic institutions, and training providers worldwide. She's previously worked at Brentford Football Club as a sales exec and at OPI Digital Group as Chief Operating Officer and Head of Partnerships. She studied at University of Loughborough and received a BSc in Sports Exercise Science and an MSc in Sports Marketing. Verity is the founder of Braybells, a fitness product designed for women. So welcome, Verity. You're a new face to me, so it's really nice. That's sort of one of the things I think I've found best about these webinars is I've met remotely so many new faces and the WIF network. So it's great to have you with us. And finally, Lungi. Lungi has worked in professional football for over 7 years. She is currently the Chief Operating Officer at Birmingham City Football Club, having spent several years at Charlton Athletic. Her responsibilities vary from looking after the women's team to safety operations across all the company sites. She joined the Women in Football Board in May 2018 and has been an integral member in moving the organisation into its next phase. In October 2018, Lungi was named as a Next Gen Leader for 2019. She was one of 30 rising star professionals from across the UK sports industry. A graduate in psychology, Lungi is especially interested in developing people and believes in the balance of diversity and representation at all levels of football. So welcome, Lungi. I'm going to hand you over to Poonam, who's going to take you through the next hour or so, and I'll rejoin you at the end. Thank you, Poonam.
Thank you, Jay, for the introductions, and welcome everybody to this webinar. Before I get started with the panel, I just wanted to let you know that we do have a chat facility, so please feel free to introduce yourself on that. and please make sure you keep that positive, respectful and polite. We will have time for questions at the end of the session. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll try to go through some of those questions later in the session. We may not be able to get through all of them, but where we can, we may try and reach out to you separately to answer some of those questions. So just to get started now, I'm going to move on to the panel, and I'm going to start by asking the panel a bit more about their experience of lockdown, particularly their experience of lockdown in the workplace. So Lungi, hi Lungi, if I could just start with you.
Thanks, Poonam. We've sort of had a varied approach here. So I work for the men's club, but one of the departments that I look after is the women's team. So we were privileged as an industry in terms of the Premier League and the Championship to actually come back to work and the workplace a lot earlier than everybody else. So we actually returned to training back in May, which was actually quite surreal. And I think at that point, we really felt the privilege of being able to sort of step out of home as such and actually go back into the workplace. So there was a lot of work that went into action in terms of getting the workplace ready for players to come back and for training staff to come back in order to feel safe. Yeah. So that went on for quite a while, and then obviously we had the games going back. So a lot of work went into that. We obviously had a lot of staff who were on furlough. We had staff who were working from home and actually working through that. Some of those staff are now coming back to obviously the workplace. I think the biggest difference between sort of then and now, I think it reflects the state of the nation at the moment, where the nation is a little bit more relaxed about all the rules, and you're sort of seeing that trickling into the workplace as well. And actually part of my responsibility as a COVID officer, acquired a new role in lockdown, is to actually make sure that actually we're doing everything that we can to stay safe and to make sure that everybody else around us is safe as well.
Yeah, it's quite interesting from a club perspective, because I suppose being a football club, a lot of what you do is venue-based and requires people to be on site. So I suppose the considerations have been very different to some of the other people who might be office-based.
Absolutely. I think we have had to obviously put a lot more thought into what's going on around our revenue generation as well. So yeah. We only just returned to conferences on site last week, just because you don't want to put the pressure on other companies to sort of say actually it's safe to come out when it necessarily isn't. Yeah. So there have been extreme measures put in place to ensure that people are safe. And then in terms of our own workforce, people have continued to work from home but also have the option to come into the stadium. We've also now got the local lockdown to contend with, so that's added another layer to everything that's going on. So it has been quite a difficult period, if I'm being completely honest. So there's been a lot of considerations around that. I think what we've also found is the level from different members of staff in terms of the comfortability of actually coming back and being on site has varied. Some people have relished it, some people have dreaded it. So it's just been about managing those people as best as we can.
Yeah, we'll come on to a bit more about the kind of challenges and opportunities around that, because I know it's quite a complex area. But I'll just move on to Alan. So Alan, how have you found it? How has your lockdown experience been?
It's been the busiest I've ever been in my 35 years of being a union official. The real problems, I suppose, were that normally I look after about 12 or 13 what we call branches, members in different employing bodies. And normally you've got 2 or 3 might be very busy at any one time, but obviously with lockdown, everybody was busy at the same time dealing with all of the same issues. So first of all, we were involved in getting people out of the workplace, negotiating furlough arrangements, negotiating arrangements to try and get people up to 100% pay rather than the 80%. And then as we moved through that, we then started moving into the getting people back to work process. So I was on 2 working groups set up by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport on getting people back to work in museums and galleries and in heritage more widely. So that was sort of setting the scene and creating the things that needed to happen and for museums and galleries, for example, to reopen. So that was an interesting piece of work. And then obviously since then, we've been trying to make sure that each and every employing body is able to reopen and for people to come back to the workplace. So we've been doing a lot of training on risk assessments and all sorts of things like that, and dealing with employers in terms of moving people back to work. And I'll say a bit more about that when I speak later. But it's been very interesting, but as I say, the busiest I've ever been.
I can imagine. I suppose so with it being so busy, obviously there's been a number of challenges, but have you sort of picked out any specific opportunities or sort of anything that you think will be a positive going forward?
Yeah, very much so. I think that as a number of people were on furlough, they had some more time, and what we were very keen to do was to make sure we were engaging people. Yeah. So we've been doing an awful lot more training by webinars. We've been doing a lot more virtual meetings. So we've been getting more people to what we call branch meetings, and we're actually attending when they could get there in person. So I think we've really learned some lessons in engaging with people virtually.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Thanks, Alan. So moving on to Verity. So Verity, how's it been for you?
Again, a very interesting experience all round. You can tell I'm still working from home. I can see a lot of these guys are back in the office. Global Sports, we're a very kind of digital based organisation. So we previously did have an office or a co-working space, but at the minute there's no real kind of need for us to go back, and it's very much been proven that we can work remotely. So at the minute, for the foreseeable future, that is us. So with that obviously brings slightly different challenges. Working from home, I've had the process of moving house in lockdown, sharing with flatmates, phone calls, webinars, all of this stuff. So it's all been very busy. And in terms of as a business, obviously kind of our predominant focus traditionally, what people view us as, is kind of the sports job board, that kind of element around acquisition. And obviously when lockdown first happened, we saw a big drop in the number of kind of jobs and roles that were available. That is starting to pick up again now in terms of work capacity, but we also have some kind of education and academic platforms, which I'll talk about later as well. But that's what we saw in lockdown, that there was a real growth. So same as kind of what Alan said in terms of people maybe had a bit more time on their hands and turn to kind of how they can upskill and use that time effectively to help further their career. So that was something we've definitely seen as a trend over the last few months as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I look forward to sort of discussing some of those issues a bit later on in the session. So obviously we're at a stage now where a lot of places have been lockdown has been around for about 4 or 5 months now. A lot of people have been working from home, but a lot of companies now are looking at their processes for getting staff back into the office. So one of the things I wanted to discuss with you, Alan, was sort of what are like employer responsibilities when it does come to returning to the office, because as you said, there are some people who are dying to go back and can't wait to go back into the office and see people. There are other people who are a bit more hesitant, reticent about returning to a work setting. So what should employers be doing at this stage in their planning?
Sorry, just on mute there. So can you hear me? Am I on? So what I thought I would do would be just to come to that, but just really to try and put some sort of context into the discussion about how people are returning to the office and the sort of debate, if you like, that's taking place between whether we should be going completely remote working or going back to the office. So could I just put it in that sort of context? So it would be wrong perhaps not to talk a little bit about redundancy. I'm just going to touch on that because we covered it in the last webinar, and I'd encourage people to, if they're interested in the redundancy issues, to go back to the webinar, which I think is on the website. But obviously, what I'll then go on to talk about is some of the issues around the debate around the future of the workplace, and then to talk about the specific responsibilities of employers, if I can do that. And just in terms of redundancy, I think it would be wrong to talk about the workplace without recognizing that there's an awful lot of people who won't be returning to the workplace because of redundancy. And today it's been announced that I think there's something like 695,000 fewer people in the work employed than there were 6 months ago. So we can see that there's been a massive fallout, and there will be more redundancies coming forward as we move to the end of the furlough arrangements. Indeed, any organisation that wants to make more than 100 people redundant is going to have to give that notice today if they want them redundant by the 1st of October. So there's a big piece of work that's going on there. So I would encourage you to look at the webinar if you're interested in the redundancy side of it. Before going on to the issues around the return, I mean, there is this issue around the general debate. And some people have seen remote working now as being a really great liberation. And for many people, indeed, it has. And a number of employers have also found that to be the case. So Twitter, for example, has told staff that it can work from home forever as a result of the successes of working from home. And I think that that's a way in which we're going. So what we're starting to see already now is discussions with employers about what their future workplace is going to look like. So talking to a very large employer today, they're trying to identify jobs that are going to be office-based for the future and jobs that can be remote. But even within the jobs that are office-based, they're looking at duties that can be carried out from home. So there's some really quite forward thinking taking place in a number of employing bodies already. And I think what we're also seeing is that workers are actually gaining some control now, that what they're doing when they're looking for new jobs is they're asking about the scope for remote working. And employers that aren't able to provide that flexibility are going to find that they're going to lose out on the best quality candidates. So there's already some interesting changes taking place. However, we do need, I think, to make sure that we don't see remote working as being the panacea. And for many people, working from home has actually been living at work. So for people who live in small accommodation, we've had members who have been working on beds with no tables, who've had to cover childcare at the same time as they've been working, while they've had a partner working in the same constrained space. I haven't dealt with any of these issues, but we know that there have been domestic violence issues, and we've certainly had cases of mental health problems. On top of that, we've had people who, we've had a member who just joined a new workplace, has had no ability to meet the new manager or or colleagues, and is now finding herself in capability procedures because she's not been able to have that proper introduction and induction to the workplace. So I think we've got to be very careful to not think that working from home is a panacea, and we do need to make sure that there is proper development taking place, and people can develop their careers and collaborate on projects as they need to. So that's a really important issue. What we also do need to do is to recognise that as people do return to the workplace, there will be some people who won't or can't, and we've got to make sure that those people aren't left out. So the issues, there was an article in The Guardian on Saturday where the chief executive of the Chartered Management Institute was saying that basically there's a real danger that women are going to be left out of development because the people who will be going back to the office will be more senior, will be male, and it will be women who are doing the childcare who will be left behind. And certainly with the TUC pointing out that 2 in 5 mothers do not have adequate childcare at the moment, we can see that that's a danger, and we'll be needing to factor that in to negotiations that we as a union are having with employers. So going on then to the question of the return to office working. We've had some very good engagement with some employers, and some employers have been great right from the very start in terms of providing equipment during lockdown, in providing a flexible approach to meeting the needs and wishes of employees with their individual concerns, providing an ability for people to still shield even though the government has paused the shielding arrangements. So some really good engagement, but also some engagement that hasn't been so good. Employers have a legal responsibility in the UK general duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health and safety and welfare at work of all of its employees. And the management of health and safety at work regulations require employers to conduct an assessment of risks that the employees are exposed to, with the aim of removing or minimizing those. This is quite a complex process, which basically involves a suitable and sufficient risk assessment. That's got to show that a proper check on all the issues has been made, that all significant risks have been dealt with, that precautions are reasonable, and the remaining risk is low. And crucially, that workers or their representatives are involved in the process. So one of the things that we've been doing, as I alluded to earlier, was providing training to our reps on health and safety to make sure that they know what they're looking for in the risk assessments. And they've been really quite comprehensive in a number of areas. So those are all important aspects of the process. But in the context of the risk assessments associated with COVID, there are a number of additional factors that we've needed to engage employers on. So these will include things like public transport. Normally in a risk assessment, you're not going to be thinking about public transport. It's there, it's always there. Yeah. But obviously with the social distancing and with general concerns that people will have about catching COVID, there's a desire to make sure that we are making sure that people are safe and feel safe to come back to work.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, Alan, because I think with a lot of people that I've spoken to, a lot of them feel that their employers are taking this very seriously, and they're doing as much as they can to make sure that any return to work is safe. But I think an area of concern is transport, especially somewhere like London, where there's a lot of people using public transport and other big cities as well.
Absolutely, and it's something that we've really been talking to employers about. There are some people who, trying to get the flexibility for people to have shorter days. So most employers have agreed that as we move back to the workplace, what we've been successful in is getting employers to agree that people can come in later and leave earlier. But as people are becoming more okay with transport, which is happening quite a lot at the moment, they're trying to then get them to now work the normal hours, but again, perhaps staggering the times of departure. So we're in a lot of employing bodies, we're playing through that process. And again, a lot of the employers I'm dealing with are taking this very seriously. They recognize the last thing they want to be doing is having their staff turning up very concerned that they've been very close to people who've not been wearing their face coverings, etc. So that's been an important area. And as an employer ourselves, people forget that unions are employers. We've been doing this, and as a manager, I've been doing this with my own staff, some of whom have come back from furlough now. And it's been really quite difficult. But the point is we want to make sure that people are safe at work and able to work. And the best way of doing that is by being as flexible as possible and recognizing that people have genuine concerns, which is what we are trying to deal with. But we've got some other issues that haven't normally occurred. So, for example, there's evidence of a disproportionate effect of COVID on people with a BAME background. So we've been trying to factor in that process, and there is a BMA COVID risk assessment tool which Sarah has put on the chat, which is very helpful as basically an individual risk assessment, where people can use that to help their conversations with their employers about the return. So if they have particular factors that may not put them in the official vulnerable group, they are factors that employers might need to know about in terms of thinking about how they deal with those individuals. And that's been really quite good. We've also been successful in getting employers to talk to staff about their individual risks as well. So that's been really quite helpful in moving things forward. So that's where we largely are with things. it is different. Every employer is different, and every employee is different. The key in all of this, in taking this forward, is flexibility and sensible approaches, and that's what we are looking to do. Some employers are not being very sensible about this, and as a union, we will intervene and we will support members where that's necessary to do so. I hope that's a quick counter through.
No, that is really informative. Thank you so much, Alan. I think that's given us quite a good insight into what's been going on and what we can expect in the coming months. So Lungi, I'm going to come back to you in relation to sort of managing this in the workplace, because I know that working at Birmingham City, there's been a number of challenges in terms of returning to work and returning to training and matches. And I understand, like from your perspective, there are, I suppose, two key challenges. Firstly, how do you bring people back safely? And how do you restart those operations safely? And then the second is around, obviously being a football club, revenue generation is quite important. You need fans back at the stadium. So how, could you talk us a little bit about how you've managed those challenges?
Yeah, of course. We've had quite some complex challenges, and they've been really, really varied. So right from the beginning, we had some members of staff who actually couldn't work from home, but their job still carried on. So our ground staff, our maintenance team, were still coming into work. That was risk assessed on the basis that they couldn't work from home. They weren't having to go on public transport. They were working physically apart. And the space that they were in was actually shut, so it was actually quite safe for them to carry on. So they've actually worked on site throughout this whole process. There were some team members who were a little bit apprehensive about obviously coming into work, and we implemented some of the things that Alan has mentioned in terms of shift patterns and sort of making shorter days as well, which actually went a long way. I think there was an element of that where people didn't really understand why they had to carry on working when everybody else was sort of at home. And then you had obviously people who were working from home, physically working from home. And then obviously you had the group that were on furlough, and actually managing those different groups of people was challenging, was doable, it was challenging. And then obviously getting training back and then getting matches back, you started to see more and more people sort of coming back to work. But even at that point, you still got quite a lot to contend with in terms of not putting your staff at risk by putting them on public transport, because obviously it is a little bit more complex. I think we're a little bit luckier in Birmingham where a lot of people do drive and they don't have to contend with the tube. And I think some of the pictures you saw of the tube were horrifying. And just something like that wouldn't put me at ease at all. But I think there was a lot around sort of the gratefulness of actually being able to, have you still got me?
Yes, I've still got you, yeah.
So I think we were very grateful of just having the change of scenery and being able to sort of come into work, still being very, very responsible, and then obviously going home again because there was not much else you could do. So those have been the challenges in terms of bringing people back to the workplace. It's actually been very difficult to the point where now there's obviously still quite a number of people who are working from home.
Yeah.
And I think that's just that just attributes to the fact that actually people can work remotely, and as an employer, we're not putting the pressure on employees to come back when actually they can work from home. You have obviously got some groups who can't necessarily work from home. So I think, as Alan has mentioned, that there needs to be that reiteration. And I think there's a recognition from employers that actually you have to be flexible, and there's always going to be a give and take. And I think as an industry in terms of football, I think that flexibility has existed. However, there's always been instances when it's probably been a lot more on the employer's side in terms of the expectation of the need for people to be flexible just because of the hours that are involved. But I think that recognition is definitely there now. The empathy is there that actually we need to do a lot better by our members of staff. So that's definitely happening. In terms of supporters coming back. I mean, that is, looking back now, actually, in terms of putting every single stage in place, I thought, oh God, this is challenging, this is challenging, this is challenging. And then now you've got the challenge of bringing supporters back in, people you have no control over. It is quite complex. It is very, very complex. And you will have seen at the moment, the government and authorities around football are obviously working to actually get supporters back in. And that's proving difficult because of everything that's happening sort of locally, and with the spike at the moment, it is proving a real difficulty, even though there are test games going ahead at the weekend. But there's a number of things we've got to consider in that. We've got to consider how people are getting to the stadium, how people are entering the stadium, and St Andrews is a very, very old school stadium. So when you think about the concourses aren't as big as they could be. The turnstiles aren't as big as they could be. When you think about a queuing system, it does make things really, really difficult. When you think about toilet usage, there's a one-way system we've got to develop in the toilets, which thankfully is in place. You've got to think about how long people are taking to wash their hands before obviously you then move on to somebody else. So that's been the sort of work that's gone into the calculation of how many people we can actually get back in safely, without then thinking about people's behaviours and actually getting them to sign up to a code of conduct to say that actually they are going to adhere by all of this and be obviously allowed in. And I think what I'm hoping for is that actually supporters up and down the country are going to see it as a privilege that they are allowed to start attending games again. It's not going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately. We were hoping for the 1st of October, but that has been rescinded. But just to sort of be considerate, I guess, of others. There is a lot of personal responsibility out there in terms of what we're doing. And as employers, we can only do so much, whether it be for our members of staff or all our other stakeholders. And I think there needs to be that personal responsibility from each of us.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. And so I know that you are the CEO at Birmingham. Have you found that since this has all happened, that your role and responsibility has changed in any way? I know you mentioned earlier that you are now the designated COVID-19 officer. So have you found that your duties and responsibilities have changed, expanded, taken a different direction?
There's definitely been an addition, Poonam. I think with the COVID officer role, it's my responsibility to basically make sure that as a club, whatever's happening, we are obviously adhering to everything around COVID. I've got no experience in COVID. I don't think anybody did until this point. And I think that there's been quite a lot of added pressure where I've had people sort of looking to me for a decision, and all I can do is obviously follow what the government says, because that's the only reference point and that's the only compass I've actually got. And I think that's been a personal challenge. But actually I'm not on my own. Our doctor is the medical COVID officer, so that's really helped. The EFL as well as the Premier League and the WSL actually have really implemented working groups to help us obviously support us through that. And I think thankfully as well, we've had DCMS on side, and we've had DCMS with us a lot along the way in terms of just helping us through this. And I think when we look at the industry and where we've been, we've definitely taken this seriously, and there's definitely we've gone above and beyond in terms of making sure that games aren't being called off, games are going ahead, and I think we've done really well, because I don't think in England there's been a game that has been postponed or called off because there's been a breakout. So I definitely think we've taken that responsibility very seriously. In terms of my role personally, there's definitely been that added pressure, but I haven't felt as if I am on my own. And I think the biggest difficulty is just sort of people looking to me as somebody who is supposed to have all the answers, when actually I don't. But all I've done in that instance is just look for some guidance elsewhere.
Okay, so one of the other topics that we want to discuss in this webinar is the opportunities in terms of jobs and employment that can come out of COVID. Obviously it's a difficult time at the moment for the football industry and for the economy generally, and I know a lot of people are going through job changes, sort of thinking about their career paths. Before I sort of move on to Verity, talking a bit more about that area, I was sort of more interested in your background, Lungi. So I know that, so obviously, as I said, you're Chief Operating Officer at Birmingham, but is it right that you have a human resources background prior to that? Yeah.
I do, yeah. So I actually studied psychology, but I also did a postgrad in human resources management. So my background is in HR. Spent a number of years as head of HR within football. But actually, what I found working in the industry, that you do a little bit of everything. So my role was very, very varied and very, very far-reaching for quite a while. So I do have a background in HR, so that does come quite naturally and quite easy to me to sort of put people and put employees at the heart of everything we do. And I think that probably has helped in terms of managing at this time. The biggest concern that that managers had sort of with obviously people working from home and obviously people continuing to work from home is being able to sort of look over them. And I think what it's proved is that obviously we need to be able to trust each other and be able to trust that actually things are going to get done. There's definitely been a change in the way members of staff are being managed. But yeah, no, having that background in human resources has definitely helped.
Yeah, and for anyone who sort of might be attending this session who would be interested in a career in HR or looking to get into that line of work, what sort of advice could you give them or recommendation you could give them in terms of getting into that part of the workforce?
I think they'd need to really consider why they want to get into that. It's quite it's a unique role in that you're obviously employed by an organisation. You're there working for the organisation, but actually you're working for employees as well. And you can land yourself in sort of some really difficult situations. And I think if anybody really, really wants to get into it, they have to have the passion for it. They have to have the passion for people. They have to have the passion for doing the right thing. And they have to have the passion for being a critical friend, really. And I think that's probably the bit I enjoyed most when I was solely focused on HR. So thankfully, I've still got the responsibility for human resources here at Birmingham, even though I'm not doing anything sort of day to day. There really has to be that passion, but also keeping on top of legislation and actually how and when you deal with people and deal with any issues, and not running into Alan, unfortunately, for when things go terribly wrong, but just being aware, really, and knowing and doing right by both the company and employees. I think that's really, really important. And it's just being balanced, really, keeping a level head and knowing your stuff.
Yeah. And then, like, moving on from there, how did you sort of move from that into a more kind of expansive role and, you know, end up at Birmingham as COO?
Yeah. So as I said, Poonam, my role was varied for a long, long time, and that was due to change in management, change in staffing structures. I was also really, really lucky enough to have a line manager who really, really believed in me, and basically encouraged me through my career. But I also found that I was very, very curious, still very, very curious. And actually what that does is that expands you beyond your scope of work. And actually with football being a unique industry, it's actually not that unique. And if you've worked in any other business, you know, there are loads and loads of transferable skills. But I think adding to that, I don't think I could be a COO in another industry. I think this works because I really, really know the industry, and I probably owe that to curiosity, the trust, and the faith that was put in me by my employers and by my line manager, and the willingness to learn, really.
Yeah, no, that is it's really interesting career path that you've had to sort of end up in this position, and it's good to learn a little bit more about it. And thanks for that, Lungi. I'm going to sort of now move on to discuss more about opportunities, because I know it is a difficult time for a lot of people in terms of career, like taking your career forward, and you know what opportunities are out there in football. So I'm going to speak to Verity. So Verity, you run an organisation that offers you know, that gives information around recruitment, vacancies in the sports industry, and training and education in the sports industries, So what have you seen change in the last few months in terms of the market for resource?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like I touched on earlier, the immediate effects of lockdown, we were working with a lot of clients with a lot of major events. That's who we work with as well. So kind of Euros, Olympics will help with a lot of the resourcing and the staffing for major events like that. And it was all automatically just stripped away. However, that being said, like we've seen a steady growth from those first probably 2 months where there was a big drop off. There have been a lot more roles kind of available. There's two kind of sectors to that. I would say probably the roles that have been most kind of common over the last few months are the high end. We're still seeing a lot of kind of CEOs. We had CEO for the FIA the other day, and some other kind of key roles in high positions. And we've done a survey and we've kind of seen that top end is probably least affected, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending where you sit on that kind of scale within your career, in terms of the job risk. However, it's not kind of all doom and gloom. We have seen it steadily growing back up. And from our point of view, the three kind of key sectors that are continuing to hire and where we've got the biggest amount of roles, and almost surprisingly, after what I just said about having major events cancelled, our top recruiting kind of sector right now is federations and major events. And I think the main reason for that is these events have all been either pushed back, so they're still coming, they still need people, might not be immediately, but also it's really making the most of upcoming events. So we work a lot with Birmingham Commonwealth Games 2022, we work with FIFA for Qatar 2022 as well, and a lot of these kind of major events will start doing the bulk of their recruitment, I would say between 24 months to 36 months before the event. So if you're starting to look at those dates, this is when people for those major events are starting to kind of look at building their staff up and kind of getting more people around the kind of skeleton people that they may have kind of had initially. So there are still opportunities in that space. I think there's always going to be a lot of competition from now on moving forward. Any job roles that are available, you probably have a lot more qualified people that perhaps have been made redundant that are kind of competing for these roles. But I also think that at some point there is going to be a lot more uptake and everybody is going to need all these qualified people at the same time when people are allowed back in stadiums and everything is, I'd like to say, suddenly back to normal. Might not happen quite at that speed. But then we're going to see kind of the opposite, and lots of employers are going to be wanting all of the same skill sets, and there might not be those kind of the amount of people to go around. The other kind of two areas that we've not seen that are our highest kind of sectors that are still hiring is elite performance and coaching. So even it was last month we had the FA advertised the England women's head coach role on our platform. We've still got quite a lot of physio roles on our platform, that sort of thing as well, because at the end of the day the sport is still happening, although maybe perhaps the commercial side of it isn't. That kind of the elite side of it is still having to go ahead on a day-to-day basis. And then also media and broadcast is still an area that is that we've got quite a few roles available. Again, it's probably changed in its description and landscape perhaps, but again, it's still, if anything, there's even more broadcast now than there was, and there's more platforms that it's available on. So that's an area I would say that is of growth as well. But outside of jobs, I know you touched on it, we have global sports. For those of you that haven't kind of seen the platform before, it used to be just a kind of job board. But in the last 2 years or so, it's expanded to be able to help basically put people at the heart of the business. And the idea is to upskill and make sure that people are as well-rounded and help their career from the start to the end point. So that being said, we've got 4 kind of sectors. So we've got jobs, where you can kind of obviously log on and see kind of what's available in the market. We've got education, which is academic kind of university courses. We've got training, which is non-academic, but ways for you to kind of do personal, like professional development while you're perhaps still working. And then we've got an intelligence platform where it's basically us working with our clients to be able to give you career insight, whether it's advice on sort of CVs or what's the best kind of topic to study if you want to get into, let's say, sort of a COO role or whatever it might be. And we saw that platform go up in terms of the percentage. Our applications for those kind of roles went up over 200% over lockdown. So the number of people applying and wanting to learn and wanting to upskill themselves has gone through the roof. Interestingly as well for you guys, in terms of football, it is one of our most popular topics on our site. So some of the kind of key partners that we work with is kind of like FIFA Masters, Johan Cruyff Institute, Real Madrid University, UEFA Academy, and all of these have seen, whether it's people that have been on furlough that are wanting to continue their learning, whether it's people that have got a bit more time because they're not commuting, or whether it's people that have been made perhaps redundant or had contracts cancelled, that then are looking to see how they can best position themselves to get kind of a role at the end of it as well. So, I mean, that's kind of how the market looks from our point of view to date. We also did, I know that you guys at Women in Football have you done some surveys yourselves. Global Sports ran a survey sort of throughout the summer, and we had over 1,000 people respond from, I think it was about 93 different countries in the end. So a really vast kind of audience. But to bring it back to kind of, I guess, the topic today and that kind of return to work, the workplace, females have actually got the highest kind of concern and anxiety around returning to the workplace. Out of any of kind of the gender groups that we had, females are at that highest point. I don't know whether we haven't kind of then gone further in depth into it, like Alan said, whether it's down to childcare or kind of the movement around and that sort of thing, but it's something that I think all employers need to kind of be considerate of. That is definitely, from our point of view, we can clearly see that is the group that is most nervous about returning to work. And then we had some really interesting kind of findings around what people expect for the new normal, and the top thing that came out was flexibility, and that was in both regards to hours and location. So people now expect to be able to kind of work around hours that suit them, and in locations that suit them on various different days. Secondly was the opportunity for individual learning and development, and then thirdly was people wanted more defined employee development and structure throughout. So I think that shows you that throughout this time, people obviously now want more flexible workplaces, but there really is a focus on learning and developing themselves, whether it's going to be people doing that individually off of their own backs, if employers aren't providing it for them. So I think that's something that's really important for employers to kind of consider moving forward, is the importance of kind of, what people want to learn and continue to grow, whether it's to then move up the organisation or move up and out from there forward. And the kind of final point that I would like to touch on that I think has been really interesting from our point of view was looking at people's motivation to work. We've seen a real shift from previously. The number one kind of thing right now is job satisfaction. So that's what people care about. And then it was really closely followed by work-life balance and then people's working relationships. I think if you'd compared it to however many years ago, people would have spoken about the kind of job title, how much money you got paid, what organisation you worked for. And that's completely shifted. Our bottom 3 things now is location, job status, and job perception. So it's kind of, yeah, it's done such a 180 in the fact that there's so much more focus on people's mental kind of well-being and learning and development, as opposed to just that classic status kind of money looking at it. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting kind of move towards 2021 as more events start to happen again. But the key things from us is there is plenty of opportunities. It's just kind of making sure that you put yourself in the best position that you can at this point, whether that is through kind of learning or upskilling yourself to be able to then kind of step into those roles as and when they do become available.
Yeah, no, it's quite interesting because I think that with the last few months, with people being at home, some people being on furlough, some people not being able to sort of do much else, I think it has really given a lot of people an opportunity to reflect on kind of where they are in life and what they want going forward. So yeah, that is quite an interesting shift. One of the things you mentioned was around kind of the education and like retraining, upskilling piece. I mean, if like for some people who may have, you know, lost their jobs, or, you know, it looks like in the next few months that they may be losing their jobs, like what can people do to prepare themselves for that? Like what can they do to sort of make sure that they're in the best position to go out and get other opportunities if required?
I think the key thing to say around learning, because I recently finished my master's at Loughborough London sort of this time last year.
Yeah.
And for me, I did that in order to kind of get into the sports industry and the network. So I've got a lot of kind of sales experience, but I couldn't get into the sports industry. So to me, the reason that I studied wasn't so much perhaps the content, but it was the networking and who I could kind of meet, and the fact that we were doing kind of live client case studies with Chelsea or Formula E or whoever it was, which gave us those opportunities to kind of speak to people in work kind of circumstances. And that being said, I think there's been a real shift towards non kind of traditional or long-term academic learning. Even a lot of academic institutions now will offer short courses where you could almost just take one particular module. So let's say you were interested in sports governance and law, you could probably go online and you could pick up a one-off module that might be, obviously there might be some associated cost to that if it's an academic institution, but really kind of focus on a particular area that you want to work on. So I think it is difficult to make sure that where you're learning from is a reputable kind of source. That was one thing I struggled with, even finding which kind of university I wanted to go to. And that's something we try and do at Global Sports, is kind of collate kind of a good group of them. But I think it's very important, like there's lots of good stuff like these kind of webinars, you're kind of linked in, these kind of conferences, everything is virtual and online now. So stuff that perhaps you might not have been able to have access to before because there might have been some kind of barrier to entry. Now a lot of that is gone because it's a lot more stuff is free and online and a lot more accessible. So I think it's just about identifying kind of perhaps areas that you want to work on or areas that you feel that you are lacking, and then picking out some kind of some areas or some institutions that you could work with to do that, whether it's marketing or sponsorship, like a diploma or something like that.
Yeah. So we do actually have a question from kind of the attendees in relation to this. Do you have any tips for kind of your CV? So any tips around kind of making sure that you have an effective CV?
Yeah, the key thing that we find, so from my point of view, speaking to the clients, so we're not like a traditional recruitment agency, just so everyone can kind of understand that. But the key thing when we speak to clients is that a lot of people come through now and have very similar CVs. Everybody's been to university, have got the same degree, maybe some kind of experience. And what they really want are people that match their values. So my key tip for kind of CVs or cover letters is really like do your research on that organization. Don't just send around the same thing to everyone. But if you know that, okay, that organization's mission statement is this, the core values are this, really align yourself and your CV to that, because that's what they look for now. A lot of people can teach the kind of roles and the positions if you've got those base skills, which I think most people that apply for these roles do.
Yeah.
So in terms of making yourself kind of stand out in a perhaps more competitive market now, for me, it's really showing that you understand who that organisation is, what their culture is, what's important to them, and making sure that you demonstrate that back to them, using the same sort of language, and then they'll kind of pick up on it.
No, that is really helpful. Thank you so much, Verity. One of the other things you mentioned sort of earlier on was around anxiety and mental health having been affected during this period. I'd be interested to know, actually, from Alan or Lungi, have you had to deal with any employees that are anxious about kind of returning to work, or or anxious about being at work, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, I've dealt with both colleagues in my team and people out in the other workplaces. I mean, they vary. Public transport, as you mentioned, Poonam, is one that was a big issue. So what I did there was to try and sort of be as flexible as possible in terms of my team member about trying it at a time that was not in rush hour, one of the quietest times, to see how that was, just to get the person back into using public transport. That worked. So we then sort of moved it to a different time. But we're still avoiding key rush hour times, and I'm particularly conscious, obviously, with a rise in the numbers again, that I don't want to push that any further than I need to. As far as I'm concerned, that person is a good worker, and they will do what they need to do if they're working from home. So I'm getting the best of both worlds, and that person is feeling that they're not under pressure to do something that they're uncomfortable with. And I think that's really the approach.
Yeah.
You know, if you take an approach that says, no, your hours are 9 to 5 and I need you in the office at 9 to 5, that's not going to work. And I think Lungi was saying that basically there's been a recognition that that's the position as well.
Yeah.
You need to treat people in a way that's a bit different.
Yeah. Has it been the same for you as well, Lungi?
Absolutely. I think just to echo what Alan is saying, it's just about the collaboration in terms of actually what works for both the company and for both the individual, so that we can actually just get the best out of the individual, but also do the best by the company. That hasn't always been easy. There are some elements where actually there are some bits that are non-negotiable, and you just have to address that as best as you can. And risk assessments have been a real key part of everything we've done, and it's obviously been backed up by actually the government have said you can do this, that and the other. And that's the challenging element of an employee who maybe is a little bit apprehensive, potentially the wrong reasons, because you do get some of those, actually being able to throw regulations back at them. It's not how I enjoy managing, and I don't have to do it often, thankfully. But sometimes you do sort of have to dip into that. But ultimately, it is about working with your member of staff.
Yeah, no, that's useful. So, one of the things. So, final question before we wrap up, really, and this is for anyone on the panel, is around wellness. So, obviously, with the kind of mental health and anxiety, have you seen an increase in employers, or do you know of employers that are thinking about developing kind of wellness programs for their employees, or having more of a focus on that?
I mean, I think that a lot of employers are recognizing as a result of COVID that this is something that they need to be doing. A lot of employers have employment assistance programs, which they're pointing people to. I haven't really heard too much about how they're going, but I think certainly as part of that risk assessment process, companies, organizations are starting to realize that they need to really sort of be thinking about this. So yeah, I think that is right.
To add to that, Poonam, there hasn't been anything revolutionary in sort of the last few months in terms of wellness and well-being.
Yeah.
We do quite a lot of work with our local Mind. Obviously, Mind sponsor the EFL, and they've got a lot of resources that we've got access to. And actually, just before lockdown, we were taking people through mental health first aid, and it's been just that progress. So I think our employees have the confidence in us that we have been doing that sort of as things have been progressing. And then, like Alan says, we have got an employee assistance program, and then our medical insurance also provides us with some telephone hours for counselling, and obviously a lot of these things, I think employers need to recognise that actually we're not specialists in these things, and we do have to sort of hand that to someone else, but we have to facilitate it.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite key in terms of actually being able to signpost employees to where they can actually get help if they are struggling, because sometimes there's a myriad of things where actually it is really, really beyond our scope. But being able to recognise that actually somebody does need support, and this is where you should be signposting them, I think is going to be really important for employers, but also employees feeling comfortable and confident enough to actually say to their line manager, you know what, I'm not doing too well, and I'd like your support in X, Y, and Z. Again, collaboration.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And yeah, I mean, it's the same at Chelsea as well, in terms of making sure that you can identify the issues, and you know, we have the resources in place. So yeah, thank you. So that brings us to the end of our session. So I just wanted to thank Verity, Alan and Lungi for that. That was really informative. And I also wanted to thank everyone for attending, and for the questions, and for the communication on the chat. So I'm now going to hand over back to Jo. And yeah, thank you again all for joining.
Thanks, Poonam. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate what Poonam said, really, I found that really informative. Loads of kind of sensible guidance. I liked what Alan said about just sort of practical advice of being sensible and flexible as an employer, and just for all of us, really. I thought that was something that I'll take away with me. I'm sorry that you're the busiest you've been in 35 years, but I'm sure we're all very grateful for your help. Verity, it was really interesting what you said about federations and events recruitment. I think there's lots of our attendees, and certainly women within our network, who will be coming to the Global Sports website to now look at that. And just to reiterate that obviously on the Women in Football website, we do post opportunities, jobs, opportunities. Keep visiting the website. We do update on social media, but just keep visiting the website if you're in need of a bit of inspiration, or just looking for a new opportunity. Do keep visiting us there. And I think, Lungi, you know, thank you from all of us for being at the heart of the game and making sure that we've got football at the weekend and on the evenings to watch. I'm sure it's not been an easy time for you. And I loved what you said about if you don't know the answer, just look for guidance elsewhere. I think sometimes, especially I know I'm guilty of it, certainly as women, I think sometimes if we don't know the answer, we're sometimes a bit embarrassed to ask for help or to admit we don't know the answer. So let's just help each other, talk to each other. And on that, just keep in touch with us. Info at Women in Football, events at Women in Football. Speak to us on our social media. You know, we are here for you. It's really testing times for everybody. And we spoke a lot about anxiety in the last hour, and I think we're all suffering from it in some shape or form. So let's just keep looking out for each other, keep talking to each other, lean on us, use us, keep in touch, and we will see you all again soon. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Thanks, Poonam. Thanks, Verity. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Lungi. Take care, everybody.
All.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.